What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the November 11th, 2024 edition of Raw Talk. Megan Morant, Sam Roberts in the studio per usual. They open up the episode replaying the ending to the show with all the chaos within the women's division, obviously setting up a women's War Games match. That was not the official announcement at the end of the show, but I can only imagine that's where we're going with this, and I'm not exactly a fan of that. Not the idea of like, oh, women's War Games, bad idea. Like, they've been doing it for years, obviously. It's just the fact that if it doesn't make sense, then you don't fucking do it. And this year, to me, it doesn't make sense. I don't even like the idea of the men's match being 5-on-5. The actual men's match itself is fine, because it's Bloodline versus OG Bloodline. That makes perfect sense. But adding in a fifth member for each team is fucking pointless. Why does it have to be 5-on-5? Why do we need a women's War Games match? I would say the same thing if it made sense for the women, but not for the men. I would say the exact same fucking thing. It doesn't make sense for the women this year. It doesn't make sense for it to be 5-on-5. More on that on Thursday's Wrestle Rant Radio. I'll kind of spare you the rant here, the elongated rant anyway. So they then replay the Pete Dunne-Kofi Kingston match, with Pete Dunne beating Kofi Kingston. We hear from Pete Dunne backstage, I think with Byron Saxton. I don't know where Jackie Redmond is right now. I don't know if Kathy Kelly was on the show either. I think it was just Byron doing the interviews for some reason. I don't know why. The Pete Dunne called it a statement win, beating Kofi Kingston, having beaten another former world champion after already having beaten Sheamus a couple of months ago. He says, get to know Pete Dunne. You're going to be seeing a lot more of him. And he says that he wants this to be a lesson for R-Truth, who continues to call him Butch behind his back. So we're probably getting Butch, or I'm sorry, now he's going to come after me. We're probably getting Pete Dunne versus R-Truth one of these weeks on Raw. They did not announce that, but that's clearly where they're going with it, which is, it's weird because it feels like ass backwards booking to do Pete Dunne versus Kofi Kingston first, and then Pete Dunne versus R-Truth, who's a much less of a threat than Kofi, who's a former WWE champion, but nonetheless. They air this great vignette for the War Raiders. Maybe it was on Raw and I missed it. I don't think so. But it was a vignette discussing their, health struggles, getting injured, not thinking they'd be able to provide for their families with these injuries and their careers coming to an end. And then they battled back, and now they're the number one contenders for the World Tag Team titles as of a week or two ago. I think as of 2 weeks ago. A great vignette. Should have aired on fucking Raw. Don't know why it didn't. Because I was thinking either during Raw or before this aired, I was thinking like it would be nice if we heard from the War Raiders. I don't think we have so far. They may have aired a vignette for them the week after they came back, before they became number one contenders. But this is an updated vignette talking about them becoming the number one contenders. I thought it was the same vignette from a couple of weeks ago. It was not. So I wish they had aired this on Raw. Maybe they still will. Probably not. But I guess these are the things that are cut from Raw when it's only 2 hours and not 3. So they hype up the War Raiders against Dominic Mysterio and Carlito for next week's Raw. They then replay the opening segment with Damian Priest and Gunther and Ludwig Kaiser. They replay Damian Priest beating Ludwig Kaiser later on in the show. They preview Gunther versus Damian Priest for the World Heavyweight Championship, now official for Survivor Series. So we had no specified date for it last week on Raw, which I'm thinking, please do not save this for Saturday night's main event. You can run it back at Saturday night's main event, but to save not the first match, but the rematch from SummerSlam for that show and not Survivor Series would have been dumb. So I'm glad they're not doing that. Again, they could always run it back at that show if they want to, but the first match in this rekindled rivalry should come in Survivor Series. We then see Kofi Kingston backstage get confronted by Lyra Valkyria, who tells Kofi that, despite all the New Day's dissension right now and whatnot, the New Day itself has meant a lot to her and a lot of the people in the locker room in the last decade. And Kofi's like, oh, thanks, I appreciate that. You've been killing it the last couple months. And, Lyra's very impressive. It was funny he said that, oh, you've been killing it in the last couple of months. She really hasn't done much in the last couple of months. She killed it early on when she arrived on the Raw roster and racked up a bunch of wins and was gradually getting over, it looked like. And then she kind of fucking disappeared from Raw as soon as they went to 3 hours, and even shortly before that as well. Or back to 2 hours, not 3 hours. It's not a 3-hour show right now. I'm sure she'll get more TV time when they do go back to 3 hours, but for now, she's really not seeing much TV time. But he also did, to be fair, it's not like he was blowing fucking smoke up her ass. He did praise her performance in last week's Battle Royal, so we did see her in the ring a week ago, and she did do well by lasting until the very end before getting chucked out by Io, so that did make sense. So while they're talking, Xavier Woods walks up, interrupting the conversation and says, hey, can I have a minute, Lyra, with my tag team partner of 10 years? Would you mind? And then she's like, okay, and then walks away. And they just kind of go back and forth and argue, and Kofi says that Woods didn't have his back during the match with Pete Dunne. He was trying to help him cheat when he didn't want that. He just wants him to have his back and be a friend and not interfere in the match when not necessary. And Xavier said, I'm just doing what I would want you to do for me and whatnot. And they argue, and Kofi walks off. So hopefully we are getting closer to a split. I still think there's a very real possibility that this storyline culminates with the two getting back on the same page and becoming tag team champions, which would be a nice moment as we head into the 10-year anniversary. I have no fucking desire to see that, though. I would much rather see a split, or Big E coming back and probably not getting cleared, but at least playing a role in this storyline to some degree, so I'm sure we're getting closer to that. They did not specify when the 10-year anniversary New Day show episode of Raw is, probably at the end of the month, because that was around the time they debuted. I think they debuted specifically November 28th. I think that's the exact anniversary. I don't know if that's the episode of SmackDown they debuted on or the taping that they debuted at. I don't remember, but that's on a Thursday this year. So I think that's probably the episode of SmackDown. If I had to take a guess, that's probably the episode of SmackDown. And they're not going off of that because, one, they're not on SmackDown, and two, that's a Thursday. So they're probably going to do it on Raw, the Raw Before Survivor Series, or like the week after. I don't know. So anyway, Xavier says that, he's giving out advice, like Kofi. He just said that Kofi was giving out advice to Lyra, like the loss that he just suffered to Pete Dunne doesn't matter. And then they argued some more, and that was it. So they replay the Nick Aldis Women's United States Championship announcement from SmackDown on Friday, which would kind of make you think, oh, maybe, it's going to be cross-branded, because they showed tweets from various superstars like Michin, Natalya, who's on Raw, among others, Sonya Deville, who's on Raw, indicating that this might be a cross-branded championship. I fucking hope so. I mean, the thing is that the United States Championship is a SmackDown title currently, so I don't understand why they couldn't just come up with a new title entirely for the women. I know like in NXT they have the Women's North American Championship, but the North American Championship, it's an NXT title. The Women's North American title's on NXT. On the main roster, you have two separate brands. So, I mean, the idea obviously is, is that they're going to have two separate mid-card women's belts for the women at some point. And thank God they're not rushing immediately into a Women's Intercontinental Championship. Like, you don't need two off the bat. At least one to start, and then you can kind of work your way up from there. I would love for this to be defended on both brands. They say fuck the brand split anyway, with as much as they kind of have the rosters interact with each other every single week on both brands. Now more than ever in the last couple of years, so why the fuck not? So, I mean, they kind of show off, like, all the tweets, like I said, and Sam Roberts picked Candice LeRae as the inaugural champion, which is a great pick, and so we'll see what they do with it. They didn't really, make that official here, because WWE themselves probably does not know, unless they do introduce a women's Intercontinental title soon after, which I hope they don't do anytime soon. I think one for now works, and then you can kind of work your way up to two, if it ends up being a successful concept, which it probably will be, I'm sure. They hype up Braun Breaker versus Sheamus for the Intercontinental Championship on next week's Raw. We hear from American Made backstage, Chad Gable, Ivy Nile, the Creed brothers, and Gable's kind of dishing out blame for his loss last week. Or did he lose last week? Oh, he did. He lost to Dragon Lee. That's what it was. And he says that he studied the wrong tape. Someone gave him a tape of Ultimo Dragon or whatever instead of Rey Mysterio. And you could see Ivy Nile laughing. She's trying to hold back laughter while Gable's doing his shtick here. And he says that, Brutus, I also blame you for getting married. Where the fuck were you last week? You weren't out here. And you were also part of the reason why I lost. So I like American Made. I like the group a lot. I like Gable with the Creeds and whatnot, and Ivy Nile also being in there. They're a fun group. The issue is that Gable was seemingly developing this serious persona coming out of his heel turn earlier this year, and then they didn't really go anywhere with it. He didn't win the Intercontinental Championship, and now he's right back to kind of being a comedy guy. Now, he does have direction and whatnot, but I kind of feel like this is the Shoosh thing all over again, which was very entertaining, but it was time to develop the character, and they haven't done that, which is a bummer. So anyway, we then hear from the LWO, Rey Mysterio with Zelina Vega, and Joaquin Wilde, Cruz del Toro, Dragon Lee. It's only really Rey and Zelina that talk. And Rey says that Gable is taking out his frustrations on his own group, as he always does. And he says that unlike American Made, the LWO is family. Which is funny that he says that, because he acts like they haven't had issues themselves. They literally started with Santos Escobar, who turned heel on them earlier this year, and then Carlito, or that was last year, I think, actually. Yeah, it was last year. And then this year was Carlito. So don't act like you guys haven't had issues yourselves, because you fucking have. And, led to a lot of turmoil within that group and whatever. So anyway, Zelina Vega basically, she was like, oh, if you guys want a mixed tag team match with Chad and Ivy versus myself and Ray, then you got it. So they preview that match for next week's Raw. They replay the Final Testament Miz Wyatt 6 segment, which I actually thought was really well done to kind of further that feud. Got a great reaction from the crowd. I thought that was a pretty good segment, actually. They run down the Slammin' 7 for Monday night. They replay the main event, which was basically the exact same replay they started this show with, but they got to kill time somehow, so they fucking replay it again. But they show more of the match, with Bianca and Jade beating Liv and Raquel to retain the WWE Women's Tag Team titles. And then they close with Sam's top 5 as stars of the night: Pete Dunne, Seth Rollins, Final Testament. Jade and Bianca as one, and then obviously, to no one's surprise, Dominic Mysterio, who Sam Roberts is a very big fan of. I feel like Sam... obviously he's great. He's been doing this shit for a long time. He's the last professional broadcaster, as he calls himself. I feel like on the WWE shows, like he's a totally different person on his own show. And I know it's like a kayfabe thing, it's a WWE thing. But I feel like he tries a little too hard sometimes to be like the next fucking Jesse Ventura or some shit. And I know a lot of people have said that about Corey Graves over the years. And I can kind of see that. I don't really feel like he forces it, though. I feel like Sam does. It's a fucking talk show. Like, he's not even on commentary. I know they kind of want like a heel persona and a babyface persona, but they don't do that with Megan and Scott Stanford on SmackDown Lowdown. They didn't do it with Matt Camp. They didn't do it with Jackie Redmond or, Megan Morant. Sam Roberts is like the only one they have on these shows that like favors the heels. Like, it's just stupid. I guess it can be entertaining sometimes, but a lot of the times it just kind of feels unnecessary. But anyway, that was Raw Talk in a nutshell for November 11th, 2024. Decent episode here, overly long as it has been for the last month, which will change, I'm sure, when Raw goes back to 3 hours on Netflix. They add so much supplemental footage here on Raw Talk that makes it, does to its credit, more worthwhile than it was previously under the original format. But a lot of this stuff, it doesn't really make me want to watch Raw Talk. It makes me want to see it on Raw. Like the War Raiders vignette was great. That should have been on Raw. The New Day segment backstage should have been on Raw. It feels like they film all these things maybe hoping they would end up on Raw, and then they don't have time, so they cut it for Raw Talk. Better on Raw Talk than not at all, or just on social media. But I still think, I still feel like they should air this shit on the show itself, for people to care about these storylines and superstars and whatnot. It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't, because they want a 2-hour Raw, but when they cut it down to 2 hours, they cut stuff like this that they, I guess, feel like they can only do on a 3-hour show. Which I think, I call bullshit on that. Raw was a fucking 2-hour show for how long? 20 years? And that was a perfectly serviceable show during that time period. At sometimes great, other times not so much. But you can find time for this shit is my point. Maybe if they want to have a longer match, I guess not. But I don't know. I just feel like a lot of the stuff they put here on Raw Talk, especially if it's a fucking 90 seconds, you can find time on the show for this sort of stuff. Just my opinion. I know the roster's bigger now than it was, 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, but, they could still, I feel like, find a way to, incorporate that stuff in there and not just relegate it to Raw Talk. But we did have that little vignette on here. We heard from, a whole bunch of people. Not as many as usual, but we heard from the LWO here. American Made, the New Day, Lyra Valkyria segment was fine. So Pete Dunne also spoke. Fine episode here of Raw Talk for November 11th, 2024. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Have a great one, folks. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.